Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, "The future is green energy, sustainable, renewable energy." I've always been interested in alternative energy ever since I think I was a freshman in high school. I actually took a class called Energy Systems, and it was really the first time I was exposed to alternative energies and how they worked, and I thought it was really cool. And I would definitely agree with Arnold saying that it is the future, and I think it might be something that will completely replace fossil fuels in our lifetime. Most people are familiar with renewable energy, at least to some extent. It's pretty obvious. You see solar panels on the roofs of homes. You see the huge wind turbines in open fields, or those big concrete dams that harness the power of water. What I decided to research is really the growth and the potential of alternative energies and these technologies, how they've changed over time throughout history, what incentives there are that encourage people to make a switch, and really what the future may hold as far as renewable energy. So first, I decided to look into the history of our energy uses and how they've come to be what they are today. According to Tom Warhol in Alternative Energy Exploration, the beginning of large-scale fossil fuel use really began in the 1700s with the burning of coal in steam engines. Later in the 1800s, that's when technologies really began to change rapidly. In 1823, a man by the name of Samuel Brown created the first internal combustion engine that was used industrially in large ships and locomotives. That engine was basically the predecessor to the engine that we see today in cars and trucks. Later on, in the 1830s, scientists began discovering what they called photovoltaic compounds. Basically, these compounds released energy when exposed to light. And as you can imagine, those compounds were the beginnings of solar cells and solar power that we use today. Another scientific breakthrough in the 30s was by a man named William Robert Grove. He was actually a Welsh lawyer who went on to become a scientist, and he invented the first hydrogen fuel cell. So we often think of alternative energy to be like this brand new technology. So it's really interesting to know that almost 200 years ago, a lot of these technologies were first being seen and first being developed. And this was a time before fossil fuels were even really being used on such a large scale like we see today. What happened, though, was fossil fuels became much easier to obtain and use, and the demand ended up skyrocketing. So, to that, in 1850s, that's when commercial oil drilling began in the United States. In specific, it was in Titusville, Pennsylvania. And by the next decade, the global export of petroleum had really begun. Soon afterwards, automobiles started using the internal combustion engines, which created a huge demand on the consumer side market. So the mid-1800s really marked the time where the value of oil and fuel became solidified. It was followed by many years of pollution, and it wasn't until nearly 100 years later, in the mid-1900s, the 40s and 50s, where environmental concerns really began to rise. Smog was seen over, cities and towns, and people really didn't realize that, it was causing illnesses and even death. So fast forwarding today, fossil fuels are a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they still make up for a majority of the energy that we use in the United States. To be exact, I think it is just over 80%. However, alternative energies are growing rapidly, and it is a good thing because many experts will suggest that we will be facing an energy crisis within this century. So Ken Bosson, in his article in Solar Today magazine, noted that in the first half of 2016, so last year, wind and solar energy increased 25% from the previous year. Coal use actually plunged more than 20%, and renewable energy sources in all were 16.6% of U.S. electricity. So comparing that to 13.7% in 2015, that is a growth of over 3% in the amount of energy provided by renewable energy in a single year. So we can accredit that jump in the increase to a lot of things like engineering, companies large and small, and just homeowners who are environmentally conscious and actually care about the earth and want to rid the world of the reliance on fossil fuels. But during my research, there was a few companies that actually really stood out to me, one of which was originally a small business with a pretty crazy but ingenious idea. So Maureen McIntyre, the editor and publisher of Solar Today, actually wrote an article about Julie and Scott Brusaw, who you can see at the bottom, and they actually founded a company called Solar Roadways, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. So the idea behind the company is to replace asphalt and concrete surfaces that are exposed to the sun with a product that can generate electricity, it can melt snow, it can provide lighting, and they have actually raised millions of dollars through grants and fundraisers. So the picture on top is pretty much what the product would be. It's some sort of basically like a solar panel that can hold up to the weight of cars and trucks, which is pretty cool. The picture on the bottom is the founders, Julian Scott, with the science guy himself, Bill Nye, which was pretty cool. But aside from companies that just specialize in renewable energies, like solar roadways, just large corporations in general still have a huge impact on the amount of renewable energy that we generate in the U.S. by their investments. So Apple, for example, recently finished a massive solar farm in Mesa, Arizona, to offset the energy use of its cloud data center. So I'm sure most of you have at least heard of cloud computing, but basically that's just delivering computing services like servers, storage databases, networking, software, analytics, stuff like that, and more over the internet. So obviously it uses a ton of energy to create these big data centers. But similarly, Amazon also constructed a 253 megawatt wind farm in Texas. So that was also meant to offset the grid electricity that powers its massive cloud. But with that, there will be over 100 massive wind turbines, each with a diameter twice as long as the wingspan of a Boeing 747. So they're absolutely huge. And they're scheduled to start delivering energy to the grid by late 2017. So this isn't created yet, but it's coming. A goal for the company is to be powered by 50% renewable energy at the end of 2017, which is pretty cool. But as I was mentioning, not only do large corporations impact our renewable energy, but also small businesses and homeowners. So many people now are becoming more aware of the hundreds of federal and state tax incentives that the governments are providing to people making the switch to green energy. So they generally differ by each state, but incentives come in the form of state tax reductions, property tax exemptions, or personal tax credits. So a guy named Larry R. Garrison actually wrote a journal that provides an updated look at current state tax incentives aimed at increasing the use of alternative energy forms. So, for example, I just picked New York, and one of the incentives is listed as this. So it says photovoltaic modules. It says there's a 20% tax credit of incremental cost paid or incurred by an owner or tenant for building integrated photovoltaic modules. So basically by photovoltaic module, they just mean solar panel or solar system. And the incentive is actually just a 20% tax credit on the cost of the panels and installation, which is pretty nice. So I would encourage anyone that's thinking about switching to alternative energy or adding solar panels to really look into it. As I mentioned, it differs by each state, and really you never know what's in there until you look. There's hundreds more. But lastly, I really decided to research the future of clean energy because I always think that's really interesting. With such massive projects already underway, what can we expect for the future of alternative technologies? Well, the Japanese Space Agency thinks they have the answer. So, since 2008, the Japanese Space Agency, or JAXA, has been working really hard to develop technologies to transmit electricity wirelessly. So basically, their goal for the program is called Space Solar Power Systems, or SSPS, and their goal is to be able to transmit energy from an orbiting solar panel back to the Earth by 2030. So wireless power transmission, which is the basis for the concept, has actually been tested and has proven to work. The future of alternative energy is bright. Orbiting solar panels and LED solar roadways may come sooner than we think. Thank you.